to proper attention to the details of your life. If you can't get the small stuff right, if it's beneath you, let's say, you won't get the big stuff right. We allow ourselves to sweat the small stuff, to pay attention to detail, because we strive to be dutiful and detail-oriented. And so I thought that was extremely important. I've tried to do this to some degree in my books and my writings, just tell people, that you have us. Here's another thought I had, Dan. You tell me what you think about this. So imagine you're trying to go out there and figure out what size dragon you should be confronting. So how do you figure that out? How big are you? What challenge should you take on? Well, you want to take on a pretty big challenge, a challenging challenge, but you don't want to get eaten and burnt. And so how do you figure that out? Well, so imagine that you take on a dragon. Maybe it's the environmental apocalypse. And you see the environmental apocalypse looming in front of you, and it scares you so badly that you're paralyzed in fear, and now you're willing to use compulsion. Right? So power starts to attract you. I would say, you've just learned that dragon is too big for you because you're paralyzed, and because now you're willing to turn to tyranny as an antidote to your terror.
As opposed to persuasion.
That's exactly right, as opposed to a persuasive strategy forward, which you would be able to formulate if you were the size of the apocalypse. And so then I would say, well, if you're terrified out of your mind by the looming catastrophe, and you're willing to turn to tyranny to deal with it because it's an emergency and we have to do what's necessary now and we have to make everyone comply, then that's evidence from your own nervous system that you've bitten off more than you can chew and that you are possessed by pride as a consequence. And so then what would you do? It's like, I don't know exactly, because when I was dealing with my clinical clients and they're looking for a pathway forward, we were always trying to figure out, well, what should you do next? And the answer was always, well, if it's too terrifying, you won't do it. So let's set you a challenge. Maybe you're socially anxious. You have to say hi to the storekeeper in your corner store, and you have to shake his hand and you have to say your name. So why don't you go do that, try that this week and come back and tell me what happened. And you come back and say, well, I was so afraid I couldn't do it. It's like, okay, man, the dragon's too big. How about you go into the store and you just say hi? Try that this week. And then you scale back, you scale back on dragon size till you find one that you could beat and you could get some treasure from, but that doesn't paralyze you into immobility and force you to rely on compulsion.
Well, this slaying the too big of a dragon pathology seems to be a pretty good, I think, description of our politics, where nobody's interested unless it's the big thing that's highly unattainable. On the left, that's a good one. It's climate change, right? It's fixing everybody's problems. It's fixing inequality. It's these big, enormous.
Yeah. It's fixing everything now at all cost. We have to fix everything right now at whatever cost. It's like, no.
Otherwise, we're in crisis. And a key attribute of that is to exaggerate the crisis as much as possible.
Well, and the moral hazard there is, well, look at me, I see this emergency and here it comes and it's a big emergency. And wouldn't it be something if I had enough power and I'm the only one who can do anything about it. So why don't you just cede all the power to me? Because I'm going to take emergency action. It's like, that's a bit of a moral hazard, don't you think? Isn't it just kind of a little bit too convenient that your moral claim happens to dovetail with your demand for, unlimited power? Trudeau said in Canada, our Prime Minister, he said he admired the Chinese Communist Party because they could take efficient action on the climate front. It's like, okay, fair enough. Maybe you mean that.
There's some prominent Americans who've said the same thing. It's terrifying. And when you were talking about attention to detail and my advice for young people, it got me thinking. I listened to last night to your podcast with the president of Hillsdale College.
Oh, Larry Arnn.
Yeah. And he was talking about how the students were demanding that he debate them about a constitutional convention. And I loved how he walked through this. It struck home with me because there is this tendency again, because of this loyalty, this constant loyalty testing, this constant competition on the right of who's the most conservative. It's like, well, I want to secure the border. Well, I want to stop all immigration, so I'm more conservative, right? And so there's this very strange tit for tat, and then you start to question, like, what principle are you tethered to, and how does that make you more conservative? And so that's the story he was telling, basically. But he didn't say this, but it was pretty obviously true. And that young people inflamed with being the best conservative they can be say, look, if you're a real conservative, you want to go real hardcore. You want a constitutional convention. And the way he dealt with that was saying, look, I'll debate you on this, but let it go after that. Let's not spend too much time on this, because the truth is you don't really know what you're talking about. He didn't say that. I'm not quoting him, but it gets to my point of, by definition, you can't possibly know really what you're talking about. You just don't have the life experience for it.
Well, that's why you're a student. Like, why the hell are you at the university if you're not a student? Like, are you a student or a professor? If you're a student, then you don't know. And if you don't know, then you're not a student, and you should be somewhere else. And the professors too, is like, are you the guy who knows at least something or not? Are you the equal of the students? Well, then why are they paying you? It's like, why is the hierarchy set up this way? And the thing is, there is nothing more demoralizing you could tell young people than you already know everything you need to know now. I mean, Jesus, I don't want to know that about me. It's like, I know everything I need to know now. It's like, what the hell am I going to do for the next 20 years then? If there's no horizon of ignorance to overcome.
I do think there's a crisis of humility in our current generation. And I do think it comes from exposure to the internet and exposure to quite a bit of information, and a total lack of gratitude and appreciation for elder wisdom. And look, there's an argument to be made that many, let's say the baby boomer generation, really screwed some things up for us. But there's a counter argument to be made that this is still the best time to be alive in history.
That's an important counter argument, the whole best time in history argument.
And it's just us having a sense of humility about what state you're really in and what you really know. And there's a calming factor to that too, that's a preventative measure to outrage culture. Because if you do think you know everything and you're so self-righteous that you'll die for that belief, well, then you're going to be pretty mad about it. And you're going to tweet about it. And you're going to chastise others who don't necessarily agree with you, or have some questions at least as to why you feel so strongly about this. And so that outrage also serves as a shortcut to argumentation. And that's pretty dangerous too. And on the right, what's happened is, again, that shortcut is usually some kind of epithet like rhino, or I'm more conservative than you. So as opposed to an actual argument about, say, whether a constitutional convention